You know, behavioral economist Kahneman and Tversky once issued this brilliant warning, and honestly, it applies perfectly to project management. They pointed out that human judgment under uncertainty is deeply affected by biases and mental shortcuts. Because of that, they urge us to challenge repeated scores in what they call green status by habit. Think about it for a second. How many times have you looked at a project risk register where the exact same risks are just marked green month after month simply because nobody bothered to actually challenge them? Yeah, we've all been there. But the reality is projects rarely unfold exactly as planned, right? Sponsors change priorities, vendors miss deadlines, technology acts up. Blindly marking a project as green by habit is a really dangerous game, and avoiding that trap is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're diving deep into PMI-RMP Domain V, monitor and close risks. As we work through our source material today, we're going to see how we can totally shift away from treating risk management like some boring, administrative, box-ticking paperwork exercise. Instead, we'll discover how to view it as a dynamic, living system that actually protects your project's value during delivery.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to cover the myth of static risk, the critical feedback loop, unpacking the 4 tasks, monitoring versus audit, the active monitoring loop, and finally, the evidence-based mindset. Let's jump right in.
Section 1, the myth of static risk.
Let me challenge your current practice right out of the gate here. Is your risk management truly alive during project delivery, or does your risk register just sit in some shared folder, slowly gathering digital dust? Here is the absolutely crucial mindset you need for Domain V. Monitoring is not passive status reporting. It is active evaluation. A risk register that you built during the planning phase is only useful if it's kept current, if it's challenged, reassessed, and, most importantly, if it's actually connected to real decisions. And hey, closing a risk? That's not just hitting the delete key. It's formally documenting exactly why a risk is no longer active and capturing what we can learn from it. We literally have to move away from this myth of static paperwork and start maintaining active risk intelligence.
Moving on to Section 2, the critical feedback loop.
So it's really important to understand that Domain V isn't just a standalone topic tacked onto the very end of a project. It's actually the ultimate reality check. It's the vital feedback mechanism that tests if all that planning you did in the previous domains holds up in the real world. Notice how Domain I sets your strategy, right? Well, Domain V uses those agreed-upon thresholds to decide exactly when to escalate an issue. Domain 2 identifies the risks. Domain V checks if those triggers have actually fired. Domain 3 analyzes the risks. Domain V tracks how those ratings and urgencies are trending over time. And Domain 4 planned your responses. Domain V tests if those responses actually worked, not just if they were implemented. Let's ground this with a practical example from our sources, a Kenyan digital health project. Imagine the team identified unstable rural connectivity as a high risk back in Domain 2. They analyzed the impact in Domain 3, and they responded in Domain 4 by building an offline data capture feature. Well, Domain V is where the rubber meets the road. It asks, okay, is that offline functionality actually being used by the team? Are the data synchronization delays actually going down? Are there any unexpected secondary risks popping up, like duplicate patient records? It's a constant loop of asking, is our risk picture still true, and are our actions actually working?
Section 3, unpacking the 4 tasks.
Now, what's really interesting here are these 4 core tasks. These are basically your toolkit for professional mastery when it comes to monitoring and closing risks. Task 1 is all about getting into the weeds, gathering and analyzing performance data, doing your variance analysis, and checking actual status against the baseline. Task 2 focuses on monitoring residual and secondary risks, which we'll define precisely in just a second. Task 3 ensures we're actively updating our project documents, meaning we're feeding data back into the risk register and logging our lessons learned. But let's pause on Task 4 because it is absolutely vital, monitoring overall project risk levels. See, it is so easy to get fixated on tracking one individual risk, like a specific vendor delay. But Task 4 requires you to step back and look at the big picture, the combined exposure to the project as a whole. How do all these individual, isolated uncertainties interact with each other to threaten your overall project objective?
Section 4, monitoring, reassessment, or audit.
Okay, practitioners confuse these terms all the time, so let's cleanly separate them right now. First up, risk monitoring. Think of this as the ongoing, living heartbeat of your project. It's the day-to-day, week-to-week tracking of your triggers, response actions, and changes in exposure. The fundamental question monitoring is always asking is, does this risk remain within our acceptable limits?
Next, we have risk reassessment. Now, this isn't daily. This is a periodic or event-driven review.
This is where we actually sit down, take a breath, and update the register itself based on new evidence or shifts in the project environment. It asks, is our overall risk picture still valid? Do we need to tweak our probability or impact ratings based on what we've learned over the last month?
And finally, the risk audit. An audit is completely different from monitoring individual risks. An audit steps way back and looks at the health of the entire risk system itself. It asks, are our risk management processes actually being followed by the team? Are the templates we're using even working? Are we compliant with our own risk management plan?
And hey, while we're defining terms, we've got to clearly separate these two. Residual risk is simply the exposure that remains after you've put your response into practice. It's the leftover risk, and you have to either formally accept it or keep continuously monitoring it. Secondary risk, on the other hand, is a brand new problem that was literally created by your mitigation. For example, say you deploy a new security firewall to mitigate hacking, but that firewall slows down your system so much that users can't even do their jobs. Boom! You've just triggered a secondary risk, and that new risk needs to be identified, analyzed, and added straight to the register.
Section 5. The active monitoring loop. So a truly mature monitoring process isn't just a one-off event, right? It's a repeating loop throughout the entire project lifecycle. And this loop has 5 very clear steps. First, we observe evidence. We're pulling hard data from our agile ceremonies, our dashboards, issue logs, defect rates, the real stuff. Second, we compare to thresholds. We check that hard evidence against the limits we agreed on in the risk management plan. Third, we decide action. Does a leader need to step in? Do we need to tap into our contingency reserves? Fourth, we communicate insight. We tailor our message so stakeholders know exactly what's going on. And fifth, we learn and update. We capture what worked and what failed in our lessons learned register. And then, the whole loop repeats.
When we look at the iterative workflow mapped out in the PMI practice guide, it brilliantly illustrates this entire concept. Just notice how everything flows continuously. You go from identifying risks to evaluating them, planning your responses, implementing those responses, and then looping right back into monitoring, reevaluating, and capturing lessons learned. It just proves that the risk process is never truly finished until formal project closure. It's a living, breathing, dynamic cycle.
Section 6. The evidence-based mindset.
To really build this mindset, experts like Douglas Hubbard argue that measurement fundamentally improves risk decisions. Basically, if you demand better evidence, you get better management. It's that simple. We really need to contrast 2 different types of reporting here. First, there's decorative reporting. This is passive paperwork. It's sending out that static, monthly list that just reproduces the entire 50-page risk register with the exact same red, amber, and green indicators as last month. It looks pretty, sure, but it does absolutely nothing. What we actually want is decision-ready insight. This is active leadership intelligence. It means translating that raw data to highlight the exact decisions required right now. It shows how our exposure is trending, it clarifies who owns what, and it flags any threshold breaches. Remember, just because a response was implemented doesn't automatically mean it was effective. We need the actual evidence to prove it worked.
So, let's summarize the core actionable takeaways from our sources today. Number 1, track outcomes, not just task completion. Demand hard data. Look at the defects, the delays, the incident reports. Make sure you capture your lessons learned formally so the entire organization can benefit from them. Ensure that risk closure is backed by evidence. Never, ever just delete or hide a risk to make a report look clean. And finally, always tailor your communication to your audience. Your technical team needs to understand root causes, but your project sponsor, they just need to know about the strategic impact and what decisions you need from them.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. Take a hard look at your own projects. Does your current risk report actually answer the "so what" question? Because if it doesn't clearly show what decisions are required, how exposure has changed, or where thresholds have been breached, well, it might just be decorative. I really encourage you to take what we've covered today and start transforming your own reporting into dynamic, decision-ready insights. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and hey, keep questioning that green status.